to discuss the prevention of violence and bullying in schools, we're now joined via Teams by Dr Shaheda Omar, Teddy Bear Clinic Clinical Director. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time this afternoon. Now, I mean, you just listened to that clip, parents crying out for schools to do more when it comes to bullying at schools. I mean, do you think that there are enough and clear policies to deal with violence in schools?
So if we look at the policies, we look at the legislative framework, we have actually the best policies on paper. I think what we need to realize is that there's a lack thereof when we come to implementation. Unfortunately, the rollout and the enforcement of these policies are not extradited or executed in the manner they should be. We are looking at 16-year-olds, we are looking at teenagers who are obviously advanced in their emotional development, psychological development, and of course the impact thereof is going to be very complex. As we can see, the grandmother that described the mental health of her daughter. So looking at prevention should not be addressed at this stage in life. We should be actually addressing prevention when a child is already in your ECD center, the early childhood development centers, where children are 2.5, 3 years and older, where we start teaching them, ensuring that they understand responsible, irresponsible, safe and unsafe touches, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, using age-appropriate language, demonstrating, ensuring that children develop social skills, they develop empathy, where they start understanding that if the way they feel when they hurt, that's how the other opposite person would also feel if that individual is hurt in any shape or form, whether it's physical, whether it's verbal. So the emotional abuse could also have far-reaching implications, and we need to start with prevention at a very young stage in life, not when we're already at this point in life. And of course, if we look at the different rules, that needs to be enforced in terms of recognizing, because often there's failure to recognize that the child is being abused. For this young girl to be on antidepressants means that she was in a total state of desperation, feeling totally helpless, hopeless, out of control, and of course had to resort to medication to assist her to use this as a crutch.
One of the things that we were talking about, earlier on, we started speaking about the fact that, many schools have policies in place, but these policies go unimplemented. Some of them are not clear enough to be implemented at schools. And we're talking about, what can be done at schools to have these policies actually implemented and sped up, because I mean we heard the story there of the two pupils in a school in the Northwest Province. One tried to commit suicide and the other one is out of school, obviously opting to do something else. What are some of the practical and proactive things that schools can do to combat violence in schools?
So you've raised something very important. I think on different levels, there needs to be interventions. Firstly, educating and awareness raising, but on different levels with your learners, with educators, with the school governing body, with all school supporting staff, and even with parents, to be able to identify the signs and symptoms of bullying, to understand, disorderly behavior. Often children are labeled as bad or mad or conduct disorders, oppositional defiant behaviors, and actually that is not the case. Children are usually acting out or symptomatic as being victims of bullying. So on that level, we need to address that there's sufficient, regular, consistent awareness raising on different levels. However, if we also look at, you raised something about the implementation of policies and legislation. So again, there should be ongoing refresher courses where educators, school governing bodies are all aware of the protocols, are aware about sexual harassment, about physical abuse, about bullying, and the referral pathways, the directory of services, but also ensuring that resources are available and immediately accessible to victims of bullies. So there are those, if we look at combating, of course, and prevention, more work needs to be done. But looking at intervention and support, we need to make sure that children do not feel ignored, isolated, and withdraw and resort to situations where we are finding an increased incidence of suicide, depression, children needing medication, ongoing psychological support. So I think these are things that need to be addressed, but we also need to look at the different rules. If we look at, I mentioned recognizing, and of course, responding, reporting. So when a child reports, there needs to be an immediate response to that, an appropriate, adequate, and immediate response, because often children are afraid to report, fear of reprisal, fear that they will not be believed, and often frowned upon, or like we saw in the video, where children are just not acknowledged or validated for what they have endured or are suffering. So I think we also need to look at teaching children on how to stand up, speak out, and come forward in reaching out. But there needs to be those kind of supportive measures that children feel they can trust and rely. But looking at the school setting, what we often find, even in terms of the play facilities, the ablution facilities, where there is an adequate or regular supervision and monitoring, and those are areas, high-risk areas where playgrounds, where children are often victims of bullying. And the kind of responses, we have to look at the 3 Ps. We look at the power dynamic, the performance, and the pattern of behavior. Often it's pervasive in the bully's behavioral patterns, but also the performance, where the bully may not be performing adequately, low self-esteem. So those are things so it's not only just looking at the victim, but also at the bully, and providing responsive and supportive measures to the bully and to the victim. I think that is something that we often fail to address. If we look at our policies, there needs to be zero tolerance, but something that has worked in the work that we do an annual global action survey, where we go out and conduct surveys, anonymous confidential surveys, where children are given the freedom to express and articulate their worries and concerns. And I think that is something that each and every school needs to do regularly. It shouldn't just be annually, but every quarter.
Yeah, I hear you. Dr. Omar, it becomes very difficult, though, when, for instance, in that video that we saw, the Northwest mother saying that she went to the principal, her child wants to commit suicide, went to the principal tells her, your child must toughen up. It becomes very difficult for parents to try and seek avenues at schools, which is probably why the Department of Education, you would recall, several months ago saying that they are looking at new laws in which, they will see if maybe one child can then put a protection order against the other child, which means jail time for the other child. I know it's a reactive, means, but sometimes for desperate parents, this is something that they will look at, an avenue that they will look at. But it also becomes very difficult because we know there are other laws that are in place, in as far as the Constitution is concerned, but these laws are not the solution at the present moment, and it becomes concerning. I mean, I'll mention 3. The South African Schools Act, the Protection of Harassment Act of 2008, as well as the Child Justice Act of 2011. Here you have desperate parents, you have all of these laws, and you have schools that sometimes brush parents off and say, your child must toughen up.
But then I think, again, you have not included the Children's Act, and the Children's Act speaks to the, promoting the best interests of the child and serving the best interests of the child. So failing to serve that, this school can be liable, this principal can be liable. And I think that's the one thing that all schools need to enforce is consequence management. failure to respond appropriately or adequately and timelessly. And of course, in this instance where the grandmother was told that the child must toughen up, it's totally unacceptable. It's even, that there's measures, disciplinary measures that could be instituted. So you speak about the Protection from the Harassment Act 71, and that was actually enforced in 2013 April. But we need to make sure that there's an intersectionality, because remember, we are talking about children, the bully and the victim being minors often, and we are dealing with children. So the intersectionality of these different acts have to come into play. And I think when you speak about prevention and what could be done better at schools, I think that is where the Department of Basic Education could come in and ensure that people are actually informed and are aware in the way they conduct themselves and aware that their actions will have consequences. So looking at the whole educational institution and people, the role players within that structure, need to have a better understanding of what is, what their rights are and their responsibilities, and to failure to actually fulfill those rights and ensure that they are fulfilling their obligations would certainly result in consequence management.
Dr. Omar, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. A difficult conversation indeed. Dr. Shaheda Omar, she is from the Teddy Bear Clinic.